Hi, everyone. Welcome to session 4 in our course on prayer. In this session, I want to go through a little journey. I want to take us through the 4 different gospels and what did Jesus say about prayer? Just as Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John recorded different things. Some of them are repetitive because the gospels are consistently writing about the life of Christ. But what I've tried to do is just pull out different ones that he mentioned in each gospel that we kind of get why the gospel writers would show us those particular attributes or aspects of what Jesus was thinking about a prayer. So what did Jesus say about prayer? Let's start with Matthew. Matthew was a particular apostle, disciple. Matthew was one of the last ones added to the discipleship team. He was a tax collector, not liked at all when he was brought in to the discipleship team, because most of the guys that were on the rest of the team were having to pay taxes to Matthew. And Matthew was working for the Romans, collecting taxes. And we don't know if Matthew was honest or not. We just know that Jesus gave him 2 words, follow me. And Matthew got up from his tax booth and left everything behind. I mean, that I just want you to know that would have been intense, for Matthew to get up, because Rome didn't just trust everybody in collecting taxes. They would have had to go and find another guy. And so that would have made Rome a little bit unhappy. And, Matthew was good at his job. Matthew was excellent at accounting. So he counted and he measured. And we see this throughout his gospel. Jesus never rebuked that in him. He just showed Matthew a different way of counting and a different way of measuring. And he said, I'm going to show you, you were counting coins before. Now I'm going to show you how to measure men. I'm going to show you how to calculate what I've done in life. He took those skills that were in Matthew and he brought them forward. And as Matthew writes his gospel, we see over and over again, Matthew is one who is constantly measuring. Matthew was the one that was always looking at, according to the word of the Lord, spoken in the prophet or by the prophet so-and-so, what Jesus did was according to that word. Matthew was constantly demonstrating for us and building the bridge from the prophetic promises. And so Jesus in the book of Matthew gives us different things that, as we look at them, are powerful and very challenging. Jesus in his first major sermon, we call it the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. He says in Matthew 5, verse 44, he says, pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you. Okay, so, wow, right off the top, Jesus is telling us, Matthew is recording for us, here's how you respond to those people who are really not treating you well. You pray for them, and even if they're mean to you, you ask God to bless them and you pray for them. What that does is that it's kind of like the cleanser of your soul, right? It takes that which the words that they've said and it cleanses off your spirit. He's actually telling us to pray for those who misuse us, misinterpret us, who don't like us, and seek to leverage us and manipulate us in some particular way. He says, pray for those people. Actually, don't try to give back what they're giving you. Just pray for them. He gives us this powerful prayer in Matthew chapter 6. We call it the Lord's Prayer, but he's, we know what he tells us, is our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. We know the content of that prayer, but not many consider what Jesus said in the context around that prayer. And he said, don't be like the hypocrites who babble and openly and do their prayers openly so that they can be seen and then everybody acknowledges the parade. It's like beautiful. Wow, isn't that wonderful? He says, go into your prayer closet, go into the secret place. And he tells us this, it's an amazing promise. He says, and our Father who is in the secret place. In other words, our Father is waiting for us. My friends, can I just say this a little bit? I just want to be clear to you. So many years of my life was spent in my devotional life praying, trying to get God to come and be with me. And when I saw that phrase in Matthew's gospel where Jesus said, and your Father who is in the secret place. And Jesus is telling us, go into your secret place. In other words, the Father is waiting for us. We don't have to spend 30 minutes of our prayer life trying to convince the Father to come and be with us. When we walk into our time of prayer, he's there waiting for us. Jesus said that. I mean, this is powerful. That's a tremendous thing for you and I to consider. In Matthew 7, he tells us to ask, seek, and knock. We reviewed that in Luke 11 as well. He reminds us to ask, seek, and knock. In other words, he's telling us to be persistent. Don't give up. He's telling us in Matthew 9, he said this. He said, pray that the Lord of the harvest would send out laborers into the harvest field. In other words, Jesus was burdened by the state of the people around him, in the nation around him. He saw that they were a sheep without a shepherd. He had compassion, and his heart was overflowing in compassion. And so he actually called his disciples to pray that he, as the Lord of the harvest, would send out laborers, because the harvest is plentiful, but it's the laborers that are few. It's not that there aren't people to bring in, it's that there's no one out there doing the work of harvesting souls. He actually tells us to pray in that way. In Matthew 18, a very interesting phrase, it's actually, I call it the prayer of agreement. He calls us to pray in agreement. He calls us to pray that we would agree quickly with our enemy, yes, but that we would, in agreement, if any two touching any one thing, right, are in agreement, they have what they ask. There seems to be this multiplication of power released when in corporate intercession, in corporate prayer, that when any two or more agree on anything that God has set before them to pray for, they know that they have what they've asked for. It's a very powerful thing that he tells us. He calls us in Matthew 21 to actually have faith in prayer, even if it's as like a mustard seed. You know, that little prayer, that little mustard seed, it's barely tangible as you look at it on the end of your finger. It's like, wow, that, you know, can grow into this mighty tree. It's simply because he's saying, even if your faith is that small, and my friends, you know, he's really calling us to believe that prayer actually is powerful and effective. And in Matthew 26, in the story where, you know, he's about to go to the cross, he's asked us to be watchful and to pray at all times, because we don't know when trouble will come. And actually, wisdom and grace and strength comes through consistent watchfulness, even when we're not in trouble and difficulty, even in times of peace. That watchfulness actually helps us maintain a spirit of grace that actually strengthens us at that time. Let's go to the Gospel of Mark. Mark was all about the power of God, you know. And so Mark talked an awful lot, Jesus talked a lot about in Mark, of having faith in prayer, and especially in our faith, that we would go in an opposite spirit to the way that people are treating us. You know, if people are offending us, that we actually don't offend them back, but we actually pray for them, as Matthew mentioned. But in all aspects, that we would have a prayer life of faith, that God would grant us grace to move in an opposite spirit in the way that we're experiencing life. Let's move on to Luke. Luke, he was the doctor. He was the one that liked to record what was going on in a very profound way. We have the most recorded healings within the book of Luke. He just recorded so much Jesus' healing ministry. But Jesus teaches his disciples to pray above anything else. Luke recorded that, and Luke recorded the mountain of transfiguration. Those two moments where Jesus teaches his disciples the actual, can I say, the actual equation or the way transformation takes place, right? So his teaching his disciples in Luke 11, that whole teaching we did in session number 1, was Luke pointing back to the mountain of transfiguration and saying, this is how a life is transformed, right? In the glory of God is through prayer. And so let's look at John just as we last minute or two. Jesus, the night before he went to the cross, we get a content of about 4 or 5 chapters, John 13 to 17, where in those 13, 14, 15, 16, Jesus is speaking to his disciples and preparing them for a moment of crisis. It's going to be the cross the next day. And then he prays in John 17. And in John 17, he petitions the Father to restore his glory, the glory that he had before he came in human flesh. And he asks for 2 particular things, and it gives us God's eternal purpose. Through Jesus' prayer in John 17, he shows us in an overview fashion through his prayer the eternal purpose of God. What is God trying to achieve on the earth through humankind? And it's one aspect of God's eternal purpose. And in Jesus' final few verses of that prayer, he says, Father, that they may be one, as you and I are one, I and them and you and me, and that we may be one with them. In other words, greater oneness, greater agreement in our lives with God. And then he says that the love with which you loved me and I loved you, that it would be in them. In other words, a greater, deeper, more mature love. This is what God is after. And so when Jesus talked about prayer in the Gospels, he had so many different things that he said, and it's just so interesting how each gospel writer gave us a little picture on Jesus's perspective on prayer and what he called us to do and the things that he prayed himself. The Lord bless you. See you next time. Grace, grace. Bye-bye.